Hi grade 10s and welcome to this video. In this video, we'll be working on the Mathematics Grade 10 September 2022 test, specifically from KZN. This test is worth 75 marks and it is for an hour and 30 minutes. It is a short test, so there are 5 questions in total. Okay, with that being said, let's get into this video. Question 1.1 says, Tyler decides to purchase a sound system which cost 7,999 Rand on a hire purchase agreement. So 1.1.1 says if Tyler pays a 11% deposit, calculate the balance after Tyler has paid the deposit. Okay, so the sound system costs 7,999, right? And he's going to pay 11% upfront. So let's find out what 11% of this money is. So multiply by 11 over 100, and let's find that first. And so you can see that what he's going to deposit is 879 Rand and 89 cents. Okay, so this is what he pays upfront. The question is, calculate the balance after Tyler has paid the deposit. So he doesn't owe 7,999 anymore. He now owes, and then 879 less than that. Okay, so what he owes, or his balance, we'll just say, by saying 7,999 minus 879.89, and that is how we get our answer there. Okay, so what he is actually going to pay is 7,119 Rand and 11 cents. Of course, they're going to add interest to this because this is a hire purchase agreement. And moving on to the next question. The next question, 1.1.2, says, the store charges Tyler 20% interest per year with a loan payable over 4 years. Okay, so 20% interest per year, and he must pay it over 4 years. Calculate the total amount that he will have to pay back. Okay, because he gets this sound system on a hire purchase agreement. This is now how much he owes. He's not paying this. He's going to pay more than this, okay? He's going to pay it instrumentally, but we're going to have to raise this by 20% over the 4 years. So it is hire purchase. So we're going to use simple interest growth, okay, to grow this money. And so the formula is A equals P, then multiply by 1 plus I multiplied by N. And we're trying to find that final amount because he's going to pay more. So he's going to pay a bigger amount. And the starting amount is P, which is this. This is how much he owes. So we'll put this amount in and then multiplied by 1 plus, and then the interest is 20%. You can just write it as 20 over 100 or 0.20 or 0.2 is still fine. Okay. And then multiply by the full years, which is 4 years. N is the time period. And he's going to pay them, so 12,814 Rand. And that 8 is going to round the 9 up, and that 9 is going to round up, and it's going to add a 1 to the 3. And so that is 40 cents. And so there we go. Okay, that is our answer. Moving on to the next question. Question 1.1.3 says, Tyler is also required to pay a monthly insurance of 30 Rand. And he must also pay an administration fee of 12 Rand. Okay, so how much will Tyler's monthly repayments be? So, you see, this is the hire purchase agreement. This is how much he will end up paying at the end of 4 years. But he's not going to pay this upfront. He's going to pay this every month. And we know that this agreement goes on for 4 years. So we need to find out how much he's going to pay every month in those 4 years first for the sound system itself, not the insurance or the administration fee. Okay, so let's find that first. So the hire purchase agreement is this, and we want to find out how much he's going to pay per month. Okay, so it was 12,814 Rand and 40 cents. And then we are going to cut it into the total months he's going to pay this over. We know that it's 4 years, and in 1 year there are 12 months. So 4 times 12, and that is 48. So split it by 48 months so that we can find out how much he pays every month. Okay, so that amount is 266 Rand, and that is just going to be 97 cents when it rounds up. Okay, so that's how much he pays every month, and that is just the hire purchase agreement amount. But then every month he's going to pay 30 Rand for insurance and 12 Rand as an administration fee. So that is now added to this monthly payment he's going to make. So the total that he will pay per month is going to be, so that's 266.97 plus the 30 Rand and then plus the 12 Rand. And let's get our answer. And there we go. That is going to be 308.97. And that is our answer. Okay, so 308 Rand 97 cents. Moving on to the next question. Question 1.2 says, on a trip to Florida, Akwande booked a hotel for 4 nights. Okay, so probably going to have to consider that. And then the exchange rate at that time was $1 for 16 Rand 77 cents. The cost per night was $450. How much did she spend in rands for the 4 nights? Okay, so let's just go ahead and find the total in dollars for 4 nights first. We know that 1 night costs $450 and she's spending 4 nights there. So that is already going to be, so that's like 2,000 minus 200. So 1,800. Okay, so it's $1,800. That's how much she's spending in total. But we know that $1 is equivalent to 16 Rand and 77 cents. If this is the amount that she has to pay, how much is she paying in rands? So we're going from $1 to $1,800. And you can clearly see we would need to multiply by 1,800. Okay, so let's go ahead and find out the total rands. So 1,800 times 16.77. So she's going to spend 30,186 Rand. Okay, so that is our answer. Moving on to the next question. Question 1.3 says, after 7 years, an investment increased to this amount. So this is the amount it ends up becoming. And then if the interest rate was 8.25% per annum compounded annually, calculate the initial amount invested. So we can clearly see we are using compound interest. Okay, so the formula here, the compound interest growth formula is A equals P, 1 plus I raised to the power of N. But here they say after 7 years, which we can clearly see that is the value of N, this investment increased to this amount. So it was a lesser amount and then it increased to this amount. So this is the final amount and we're actually trying to find the initial investment, which is P. This is what we're looking for. Okay, we can also see the interest rate is 8.25, so we have everything. So A is equal to 95,798.35 is equal to, and we're looking for P, and we'll say 1 plus the interest was this, but remember it's percent, so you're going to say 8.25 over 100. As a decimal, this is 0.0825, and then raised to the power of 7 because it was a time period of 7 years. So the goal is to get to P. How do we get to P in this equation? Well, all of these are numbers. So if we get rid of the number, then we get to the P. It's multiplying to the P, so you get rid of it by dividing. So we'll divide by this. You can just say divided by 1.0825 raised to the power of 7 because if you say 1 plus this decimal, that's what it gives you. And what you do on that side, you also do on this side. And let's go ahead and see what we get. So on your calculator, this is all you are putting in. And so here is the initial investment. It's going to be 55,000 Rand, even if you round off to 2 decimal places. So that is our answer. Moving on to the next question. The next question, question 1.4 says, Linda deposits 4,500 Rand into a savings account. And then at the end of 4 years, she adds a further amount of 2,500 into the savings account. You can already see when somebody invests money and then they put extra money in, this is usually going to be a timeline question. Okay, the interest paid on the savings is 7.5% per annum compounded annually. So the first question asks us to calculate how much is in the account at the end of 4 years immediately after the second deposit. Okay, so let's look at this as a timeline. She first deposits 4,000 500 Rand. Okay. And we know that this account is going to run for 4 years. So we'll say T0. And so after 1 year at T1, this money is going to gain interest worth of 1 year. And then we have T2, it's going to gain interest worth of 2 years, and then 3 years, and then this is the 4th year. So what they're saying is at the end of 4 years, okay, she adds a further amount of 2,500. So looking at it like this is where the money goes in. This would be the end of 1 year. 1 year has passed now. And then this would be the end of 2 years, end of 3 years, and this is the end of 4 years. So this is where the 2,500 goes in. So from this, you can already see that the 2,500 is not going to gain any interest because she doesn't leave it in the account to gain. So here's how we calculate this. We know it's compound interest growth. And so the formula for compound interest growth is A equals P and then 1 plus I raised to the power of N. And so we're finding that final amount. And she starts off with depositing 4,500 Rand, okay? And it's 1 plus, the interest rate was 7.5. So that is 7.5 over 100, or as a decimal, 0.075. And then raised to the power of. You're going to look at this deposit of 4,500 and ask, how long did this stay in the account for? Or how many years worth of interest did it gain? That's 1, 2, 3, 4 years worth of interest. So it's raised to the power of 4. But then she still has this money come in, and then it doesn't gain any interest because she deposited it at the end of the 4 years. So it's going to be plus 2,500 with no interest attached. And we can finally find our answer. And our final answer, the final amount in her account will be 8,509 Rand and 61 cents. And that is our answer. Moving on to the next question. Question 1.4.2 says, calculate how much there will be available in the savings account 10 years after the first deposit. Okay, so 10 years after the first deposit. So that means if this timeline was extended to 10 years instead of just the 4 years. Okay, since that is 10 years after the first deposit. So 1, 2, 3, all the way to 10. Okay, so term 10. So we would just have to adjust this formula because nothing else changes, just the time period. So the money that is in the account is just going to stay for longer, and so it will gain more interest. So look at each of the deposits. The 4,500 is not going to stay for 4 years anymore. It came in at the beginning and it stays for the full 10 years. So we're going to have 10 there now. And then now the 2,500 is actually going to have interest attached to it because it stays, okay, till T10. So that is going to be 1 plus 0.075. And now how long does it stay? It came in term 4. So it's going to be term 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay, so it's going to gain interest worth of 6 years. Okay, and that is the new calculation we need to have. So let's find out how much will be in the account. And that final amount is now 13,132 Rand. And then that 5 is going to round the 9 up. Okay, and that's going to add a 1 to the 8. So, and 90 cents. And that is what we're going to have there. Okay, so that is it for that question. And that is our final answer. And that is it for question 1. Question 2 says 2.1. A bag contains yellow and blue balls of equal size. The probability that a marble chosen at random will be yellow is 1 over 6. Now 2.1.1 says, if it is given that there are 102 marbles in total, okay, in the bag, how many of them will be blue? Okay, so they've given us the chance of selecting a yellow marble. That is 1 over 6. Then that would mean that since there are only yellow and blue marbles in the bag, then the chance of selecting a blue marble would be 5 over 6. And so if there are a total of 102 marbles, you're just going to say 102 and then multiply by 5 over 6 so you can see the total blue marbles in the bag, since there's a 5 out of 6 chance of selecting a blue marble. we would always take the total amount of blue marbles over the total marbles in the bag. And that is why this is going to tell us the total blue marbles. Okay, so this is equal to 85. Okay, so that means there's simply 85 blue marbles. And that is our answer. Moving on to the next question. The next question, 2.1.2 says, if there are 26 yellow marbles in the bag, how many of them will be blue? Okay, so this time there are 26 yellow marbles. So we're not looking at this info, but we will of course look at the original info. So initially they told us that the probability that a marble chosen at random will be yellow. Okay, so we know the chance of selecting a yellow marble. That is 1/6. So if we want to find out how many marbles are blue, let's just find out how much marbles there are in total. Because if we find out the total amount of marbles, then we know that some of them are yellow, some of them are blue, but they're exactly 26 yellow, and then we'll know the blue. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Now we already know the chance of selecting a yellow marble. We find this by simply saying the amount of yellow marbles over the total amount of marbles that we have in the bag. We know that that probability simplifies to 1/6. So we can use this to actually solve for this. Now, how many yellow marbles are there? There are 26. So we'll say there are 26 yellow marbles, and we'll say 26 out of what is equal to 1/6. This is to help us to find the total marbles that we have in the bag. Okay, so this is just algebra. We're just going to cross multiply, and this is x, and then 26 times 6, and that's 156. So now we know that there are a total of 156 marbles in total. If we know that 26 of them are yellow, then how many of them are blue? We'll say that the blue marbles would be found by saying 156 minus 26, and that gives us 130 blue marbles, and that is our answer. Okay, so that is it for that question. Moving on to the next question. Question 2.2 says, complete the following, and 2.2.1 says, for exhaustive events, probability of A or B is equal to. So when we're looking for the probability of A or B, you are adding the probability of A with the probability of B without including the addition of any intersection twice. Okay, so with exhaustive events, they can be mutually exclusive. They can also be a situation where they're not mutually exclusive. But the whole point of exhaustive events is that the probability of A, okay, or B is simply just going to give you 1. Okay, so if you added the probability of A or B, if you found the probability of A or B, which would be this, it would give you 1. Okay, so it just means that everything in the sample space would lie in these circles. They wouldn't be outside. Okay, it could also be a situation where you say probability of A or B here, and then it also gives you 1. Okay, so those are exhaustive events. And so we just know that they are equal to 1. Probability of A or B is equal to 1. It adds up to 1. Okay, moving on to the next question. And then 2.2.2, they say for mutually exclusive events, the probability of A and B should be equal to. So if they are mutually exclusive, okay, they are excluded. They would not intersect. Okay, you can see this as they have mutually decided to exclude each other. Okay, they do not intersect in this case, and so there is no intersection. Here we have an intersection. This would be the probability of A and B. Here we don't have an intersection, so in this case the probability of A and B should be equal to 0. Okay, moving on to the next question. Question 2.3 says, given that A and B are inclusive events, the probability of A or B equals 0.9, and the probability of A is 0.6, and the probability of B is 0.4. Calculate the probability of A and B. Okay, so these events are inclusive events, which means they are the opposite of mutually exclusive events. Okay, that means they intersect. We can have them looking like this. Okay, so they intersect. And so the info that they've given us, and really what they want us to find, they gave us the probability of A or B. In the case where you have non-mutually exclusive events, inclusive events, then to find the probability of A or B, this is how we would calculate this. We say the probability of A or B is equal to the probability of A plus the probability of B minus the probability of A and B. And the whole reason we are doing this is because of this. So if you said the probability of A, you take everything in the circle of A, right? And then you'd say plus the probability of B and then everything in the circle of B. Do you see a problem that, we would have when we do this? We already said the probability of A, including the intersection. And then we said plus the probability of B and included the intersection again. And this is the reason we say minus the probability of A and B, so that we can remove that intersection that was added twice. So with this equation, you see how we have the probability of A and B? We need to find this. So we're going to make this the subject and then substitute everything else we have. So here the probability of A or B, that is 0.9. So 0.9 equals, and that is 0.6 plus 0.4, and then minus the probability of A and B. But notice this is negative, okay? It says minus the probability of A and B. So we can just go ahead and transpose it to make it positive. And now we have positive, okay? So it's probability of A and B, and then it's equal to, so if we add these together, we're going to get 1 as a decimal, okay? And then 0.9 comes over to become minus 0.9. And so finally, we find that the probability of A and B is equal to 0.1. And that is our answer. Moving on to the next question. Question 2.4 says 205 grade 10 students have a choice of 2 sports. So they can either play soccer or hockey. And they tell us that 86 students play soccer, 64 students play hockey, 63 students play neither of the 2 sports, and let the number of students that play both sports, so that's soccer and hockey, be X. And we need to draw a Venn diagram to represent the above information. So notice that we are referring to 2 sports here, that is soccer and hockey. But they will intersect because we have a case where students play both sports. So soccer and hockey, and that would be here. So that's soccer and that's hockey. Now, when filling in your Venn diagram, always start with the intersection, because when they tell you info like 86 students play soccer, they're saying the 86 students in this entire circle play soccer. That includes the intersection. So we can't just write 86 here because that would stand for the students who play soccer only and not hockey. So that's the reason we need to start with the intersection. So they said that should be X, so we'll call it X. And then now we know 86 students play soccer. So we just want the learners who play soccer alone, okay, without playing hockey. And to find them, if a total of them, 86, is made up of the ones who play soccer only and the ones who play soccer and hockey, then together they make up 86. And so how we would find this is simply by saying 86 minus X, okay? And then that gives us the ones who play soccer only. And then likewise with hockey, we want to find the students who play hockey only without playing soccer. So that would be the total 64 students who play hockey minus that intersection of X. Okay, and then they also told us that 63 play neither of the 2 sports, so they would be outside. And here's our Venn diagram. Moving on to the next question. Then the next question says, how many students play both soccer and hockey? So that is X, okay? The ones who play soccer and hockey. They want us to solve for X. We can solve for X here because we have information about the total number of students there are. There are 205 students. So it means that if you add everybody in this Venn diagram, okay, the total sample space will be 205. And that's what we're going to do. So that is the 86 minus X students, the X students, the 64 minus X, and then the 63, they all add up to 205. And now we can solve for X here. So here we're going to have a negative and a positive X cancel. And then let's add our numbers. What's 86 plus 64 plus 63? And that gives us 213. And then we still have a minus X. So minus X is equal to 205. And then we're going to transpose the X because it's currently negative. So bring it over to the right-hand side. It's positive now. And we have 213 minus 205. And that would give us the value of X. So we simply just have 13 minus 5 students, which is 8. And that is what x is. X is simply equal to 8. Moving on to the next question. Question 2.4.3 says, determine the probability that a learner chosen at random plays hockey only. Okay, so hockey only. When we are looking at this in the Venn diagram, they're saying hockey only, not hockey like this whole thing, because the students who play hockey and the ones who play soccer and hockey jointly. But we want the ones who play hockey only, and that is the 64 minus x. So we know that the ones who play hockey only, right, that is 64 minus x, but x is 8. So that is 56. And now finally we need to get this as a probability, because they said determine the probability. So that is 56 over the total number of students we have, which is 205. And that would be our answer, okay? I can see that this is an even number, this is 5, so they definitely don't divide, okay? And that is our answer. And that is it for that question. Moving on to the next question. Question 2.5 says, given A and B are two mutually exclusive events. The probability of A is 0.5 and the probability of B is 0.4. We need to determine the probability of not B. So if you looked at it on a Venn diagram, just to understand, we don't have to do this though, but just a quick Venn diagram. When we have A and B, they are mutually exclusive, so they do not intersect. They said the probability of A is 0.5 and then probability of B is 0.4. So you can see that if you had to add everything up together, okay, in the Venn diagram, it should add up to 1. But currently we'll get 0.9. So you can see that means that there's a 0.1 outside, okay? But regardless of that, and even if you didn't find any of these, they simply ask for the probability of not B. So circle everything except for B. If we did that, you see what we would get. This is everything else excluding B. And so do you see how you can just say 0.5 plus 0.1 to get that? Or the way that you should actually use, if you didn't need to draw anything, is simply by saying everything else in the Venn diagram, right? It would add up to 1. Okay, that's 100%. Everything would add up to a decimal of 1. So you would say 1 minus the probability of B, and that would give you everything that is not B. Okay, so everything minus B, and then it will give you all of that. Okay, so that is minus 0.4, and so this is equal to 0.6. And so that is our answer, and that is it for question 2. Question 3 says the coordinates of triangle ABD are given as, and we have A as -5 and 4. We have the coordinates of B and D below. E is the midpoint of BD. So let's just make a note of that. If E is the midpoint of BD, then it means that BE is equal to ED. Okay. So they say calculate the length of BD. Leave your answer in surd form. So we have the full coordinates of B and D. We'll take that as 0.1 and this as 0.2. And let's find the length. So to find the length, we need the distance formula, which is the square root of x2 minus x1 all squared plus y2 minus y1 all squared. Of course, you could also put it as y2 minus y1 all squared first before this one. Okay, so this is going to be equal to BD is finally equal to the square root of, it's going to be the x2 -1 minus 3 all squared and then plus, and then the y. So that's -3 minus 5 all squared. And then we just have to punch this into the calculator and find the length of BD. And BD is 4 square root 5 units. And that is our answer. Moving on to the next question. The next question says, determine the coordinates of E, the midpoint of BD. So it's the midpoint of BD. So we can use the midpoint formula to find this. Okay, so this is the first point, the second point, and we're finding E, that midpoint. So midpoint, we find this by saying x1 plus x2 over 2, and then y1 plus y2 over 2. And so E, the midpoint of this line BD, we'll just call it E, we would simply just take those x values. So that is 3 plus -1. But of course, if you say 3 plus -1, when you multiply that positive and that negative, they just become negative. So it's just 3 minus 1 over 2, and then the y values, and that is 5 plus -3. Okay, so 5 minus 3 over 2. And let's get our answer. So E is finally equal to, that is going to be a 2 divided by 2, which is 1, And then 5 minus 3 is 2 divided by 2, which is also 1. And that is our answer. E is simply 1 and 1. I'm just going to put that down because we're probably going to need it as we go on. Moving on to the next question. Question 3.3 says, show that AE is perpendicular to BD. So AE is perpendicular to BD. To show that lines are perpendicular, we can show them that the gradient, and of course that means we need to find the gradient. If we find that the gradient of AE multiplied by the gradient of BD give us -1, then it means that these lines are actually perpendicular. So we need to find the gradients of AE and BD. Let's go. Okay, so the formula for gradient is the change in y, so y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So the gradient of BD first is, and we're going to just take we'll just take B as the first point and D can be the second. So that is y2 minus y1, -3 minus 5 over, and then x2 minus x1, so that is -1 minus 3. And so let's see what we get here. The gradient of BD is finally equal to, that will give us -8, and that gives us -4 in the denominator. So we get 2 here. Okay, now let's find the gradient of AE. You don't have to write the formula again, we already have it. So y2 minus y1, I'll take E as 0.2. So that's going to be 1 minus 4 all over 1 minus -5. And so if you multiply in, it will become a +5. So that is going to be a -3 in the numerator and a +6 in the denominator. And when they divide, they become -1 over 2. Okay, so now all we have to do is show them that these gradients will multiply to become -1. So if you take the gradient of AE and you multiply by the gradient of BD, what does it give us? So that is -1 over 2 multiplied by 2, which indeed gives us -1. Okay, so you can just conclude, because the gradient of AE multiplied by the gradient of BD really gave us -1, this concludes that AE is indeed perpendicular to BD, and that is our answer. Moving on to the next question. Question 3.4 says, determine the equation of the line which is parallel to BD and passes through A. So what do you know about parallel lines? If lines are parallel, it means their gradients are the same. So this line we are referring to, its gradient would be whatever the gradient of BD is, since it is parallel to BD. We just found the gradient of BD, it is 2. So this gradient is 2. Now we know that it passes through A, okay, and we have the coordinates of A. A is -5 and 4. So we can find the equation of this line. Okay, and to find the equation of a line, we just say y equals mx plus c. That is the general equation for a straight line, and m stands for your gradient. So y equals 2x plus c. And now to find c, we're going to substitute this point into this. Okay, it just looks like with patterns. Tn equals dn plus c. It's the same thing, okay? It's the same concept. And so that is your x and your y value. And so that is 4 equals 2 multiplied by -5, then plus c. And let's find c. So this becomes -10, but when you take it over, it becomes +10. So you're saying 4 plus 10 equals c, and so c is equal to 14. And finally, the equation of this straight line is y equals 2x plus 14. And that is our answer. Moving on to the next question. The next question, 3.5, says calculate the area of triangle ABD. Okay, let's just look at that triangle first, just to see if we have certain things. Okay, you see how this triangle has a perpendicular height. See, first, to find the area of a triangle, you can find this by simply saying a half multiplied by its base. Okay, so you find the bottom part of the triangle and then multiply by its perpendicular height. The height of a triangle is always drawn from the highest point of the triangle and then down to the base, and that height needs to be perpendicular to the base. So you see how AE is going to serve as the height of this triangle. So if we can find AE, the length of AE, and we have the base, we actually do have the base. Yeah, we found BD. It's 4 square root 5 units. Then we can find the area of this triangle. Okay, so all we need to do is find the length of AE. Okay, so the area of this triangle, let's find AE first. AE, the distance of AE, I won't write the formula again, but we can just find it. It's x2 minus x1. So AE, let's take this as the second point. So that is going to be 1 minus -5 all squared plus 1 minus the 4 all squared. And let's quickly get AE. And that gives us 3 square root 5. Okay, so we know AE now. And now finally to find the area of triangle ABD. This is equal to a half multiplied by its base, which is clearly BD. And so we'll say BD multiplied by its perpendicular height, AE. So this is a half multiplied by BD, which was 4 square root 5. We found that initially. And then multiplied by 3 square root 5. Okay, we don't really need a calculator for this. You can see that root 5 and root 5, when they multiply, they really just become root 5 squared. So that breaks open. So this is just 4 times 3, which is 12. So 12 times 5, and then times a half. A half of 12 is 6. So this is really 6 times 5, which is 30. Okay, so 30 units squared. And that is our answer. And that is it for that question. Moving on to the next question. Question 3.6 says, determine the coordinates of point C such that the quadrilateral ABCD is a rhombus. Okay, let's get that quad down. Okay, so this would be point C. If this was a rhombus, how would we find point C in this quad ABCD? Well, now you'd have to think about properties of a rhombus. One thing about a rhombus is it has diagonals. And its diagonals, they're not equal, but they do bisect each other, okay? So if we had these two diagonals showing, we only have one of it showing BD, right? So if you had to connect A and C, right, that would be another diagonal. And E, because E is already the midpoint of BD, then it makes E also the midpoint of AC. So here's the thing about diagonals bisecting each other in a rhombus. If the diagonals bisect each other in a chord, what it means is that this diagonal cuts the other one into 2 equal parts, making this part equal to this part. But then BD also bisects AC, so it cuts it into 2 equal parts as well, so this is equal to this. And so that would mean AE is equal to EC, making E the midpoint of AC. So since E is the midpoint of AC and also, of course, the midpoint of BD, this is what we're going to state first. So I'm going to use midpoints to do this. I'm going to state that I know that the midpoint of AC is exactly the same as the midpoint of BD because this is a rhombus. And now we're going to use this. In this situation, focus on the blue line. We are saying that E is already the midpoint, and then these are the endpoints. So since we are using midpoints, we're going to work with this like we are trying to find the midpoint of this line. Okay, this is our first point, this is our second point. So we have X and Y since we don't actually have values there. I will call this point 1 because I just want X to come first, and I'll call that point 2. So to find the midpoint of a line, we say X1 plus X2 over 2, and then Y1 plus Y2 over 2. I wouldn't really need to rewrite this because, we already wrote it before. Now, we already know what this midpoint is. We know that that midpoint is 1 and 1. But this one is the calculation for the midpoint. So on one hand side, we have the actual midpoint. On the other hand, the calculation for that midpoint. So we'll take in x1, which we can see is x. So that's x plus, and then that's the -5. Plus -5 is just -5 over 2. And then y1, which is just y, then plus 4 over 2. Okay, so this is the actual midpoint. This is the calculation for the midpoint. They stand for the same thing, meaning their x values are exactly the same and their y values are exactly the same. So we're going to equate them. So now we have x minus 5 over 2 is equal to 1, and y plus 4 over 2 is equal to 1. And now we can solve x. So to solve x here, get rid of the 2. It's dividing, okay, so multiply both hand sides by 2 to get rid of it. So that cancels this 2 out here. And now we have x minus 5 equals, and that becomes a 2. And then transpose the -5. So x is equal to 2 plus 5, which is equal to 7. And then we're done with that. Here, same thing. Get rid of the 2 by multiplying by 2 on both sides. And so y plus 4 equals 2. Transpose the 4 2 minus 4 equals negative 2. And there we go. Now we can see that the coordinates of C, the x value is 7 and the y value is negative 2. And there we go. Using the midpoints. Okay, so that is it for question 3.6, and that is it for question 3. Question 4, 4.1 says, the data below represents the rainfall in millimeters during the month of September in KwaZulu-Natal. We have the rainfall, so this is where the rainfall was greater than 0 but less than or equal to 20. And you can see there are some missing things here. I keep seeing questions that look very, very familiar. I've seen another one that looked a lot like this. And I think they're also referring to rainfall. But okay. You see from these patterns, grade 10s, you'll notice that going through past exam question papers would help you a lot, especially when you're actually working through them for understanding. And again, that is the main purpose for the videos, okay? It's so that if you had to look at the memo and, you were lost, you could always just look at the video solution and then you understand what's going on. So work through as much past exam question papers as you can, and you will see how you start seeing the patterns in these questions. So the first question, 4.1.1, says, determine the missing values in the table above. So we need to find out what A is, B, and C. Let's see what they're referring to. Okay, so A is a frequency value, but they give us the info about the midpoint and then the midpoint times the frequency. So they must have said midpoint times frequency to get 20, but we can see the midpoint is 10. So what multiplied by 10 gives you 20? That is 2. So we know that A is equal to 2. And then B, also just look at what we have here. We know that frequency times midpoint, okay, 5 times what gives you 250. That would be 5 times 50, or you can just say 250 divided by 5. And so that is 50. And then C, how do we get C? This is midpoint times frequency. So just say 3 times 110. Okay, so that is 330. And there we go. So A is 2, B is 50, and C is 330. Okay, I'll also just put that down there. The next question, 4.1.2, says, use the table above to calculate the estimated mean rainfall. So the estimated mean. They have made things very easy right now because they've already done the midpoint times frequency, and so we can find this. So this is still the mean. The only reason why it is the estimated mean is because they gave us group data. Normally when you're trying to find the mean or the average, okay, if you're trying to find the average of your marks, you would take all your marks, add them up together, and then divide by the number of subjects that you have or the number of marks that you had. So let's say you had 7 marks added up. You see, we would need single data points. Now the problem with this is these have been grouped. The info that we have is about the rainfall, but it has been grouped into classes, okay? So from 0 to 20, 20 to 40, and so on. So here's where the estimation comes from. Instead of going to these groups and finding out exactly what the millimeters of rainfall that we had there, we can't really do that because we can't see that data. What we're going to do is we find a midpoint, and that midpoint is going to serve as the rainfall for this entire class. Okay, so instead of going and trying to see all those millimeters that we get there, we're just going to use 10 millimeters. That's where the estimation part comes from. But now it's 10 millimeters, but it has a frequency of 2, meaning we had a rainfall of 10 millimeters twice. Okay, and then this one would be 34 times, and so on. So instead of just taking the 10, the 30, and taking these as our data points and then adding them up together, we still need to say times the frequency because this occurred 2 times, this occurred 4 times. Okay, so that's where this comes in. And so they've already done that for us. Now these will serve as your data points. You take all of that, add it up together, and then you're going to divide by the total sum of this, okay? Because this is the frequency. This is the amount of times each class occurred, okay? So we'll take that, we'll add it up together. So we need 2 totals here. We need this, the total of this, and we need this total over here. So the frequency adds up to 30, and then let's just add that midpoint times the frequency. And this adds up to 2120. And so to find that estimated mean, all we do is say the 2120 divided by 30. And that is our estimated mean. Okay, which gives us 70.6. Okay, that's 6 recurring. So it's going to be 7. And then it is millimeters. That is on average. That would be the rainfall in millimeters on average. Moving on to the next question. The next question says represent the data on a histogram. Okay, so a histogram, we're going to just use the frequency and the rainfall. So let's go ahead and we just see that this goes up to 8. So at least we need like 8 or 9 lines. Okay, so that is our frequency. And then let's go ahead and put down these values. So we're going from 0 to 20, and then 20 to 40, then 60, and then all the way to 140. You can also write it down as classes. That's also fine. Okay, so like that. And then you can just put the rainfall in millimeters. And then you can just give it a relevant title. So a histogram, and then showing basically the rainfall, the daily rainfall during the month of September in KZN. So we can just put that down. Okay, and now let's put down our values. So we have from 0 to 20, that was 2. So it's a histogram, not a frequency polygon. So this is going to look like a bar graph, just that the bars will be joined together. Okay, so we have from 0 to 20, that is 2. So from 0 to 20, we're just going to have 2. And here is our first bar. Then the next one was from 20 to 40, and that had a frequency of 4. So from 20 to 40, we have a frequency value of 4. Okay, and then we have from 40 to 60, that is 5. And we'll just put all of these down. Okay, so here is our histogram. And there we go. Moving on to the next question. The next question, 4.1.4, says, in which class interval will the following be found? So where will we find the median? So the median, remember that this is also known as Q2. This is marked at half our data set. So if we had to take our, data and then we cut it into 4 parts, then the median is right in the middle. So we will find it at 50% of our data. And we can easily do this by just saying a half multiplied by, now this is not the actual median yet, this is just the position of it. We want to find out which class interval will the median be found in. So you have to say a half multiplied by, and you're always going to multiply this by the total frequency. Because all of these, they've already been put in ascending order. You see from 0 to 20, 20 to 40, and so on. So with the numbers, we know that there's a total of 30. We want to find the middle in between 30, and that would be 15. Okay, so we'll just say a half multiplied by 30, and this is 15. So we need to find the 15th value, okay? So there are 2 values here in this class. There are 4 values in this class, making a total of 6 values so far. The 15th value will have to keep adding until we can see that the number 15 is in this region. Okay, so that is 6 values, and then plus 5 is 11. So long we have 11 values in total here. And then do you see that the 15th one would be here, because 11 plus 6 is 17. So we know that the 15th number, or the 15th value that showed up, is in this class over here. Okay, now the previous one, we only had 11 values so far. The 15th one is here. Okay, so that is our class. That's the class interval that the median falls in. So we'll just go ahead and tell them this is where x is greater than 60, but less than or equal to 80. And that is our answer. Moving on to the next question. The next question says the 75th percentile. This is also known as Q3, because if you divide your data into 4 equal parts, then this part is 25%, right? So the 25th percentile will be found here. And then half of it, we know that's 50%. And then plus 25, that is 75%. And that's Q3. So that's what we're looking for, Q3. But you can simply just find this by saying, so the 75th percentile will find this by saying 75 over 100 or 3 over 4. Okay, because it also simplifies to 3 over 4. And you say multiply by the total frequency, which was 30. and this will give us the position of where we will find this. And this is 22.5. Okay, so at 22.5, we are going to look for position number 22.5. We stopped here at position number 17, right? This was position number 17. Then go further, and where will position number 22.5 fall under? So if you say plus 8 here, that makes that 25. So it means the position number 22.5 would fall into this class. So that is where we have that. And that is where x is greater than 80, but less than or equal to 100. And that is the class interval. Moving on to the next question. And then they say the mode. Okay, so they don't have to say the modal class because they said in which class interval will the following be found. So where will the mode be found? The mode is the number that repeats itself the most. So the class that repeats itself the most, how would you identify that? Well, the frequency is going to tell you how many times that class repeated. Here, this class repeated twice. This class repeated 5 times. So the mode would be the class that repeats the most, meaning the class with the highest frequency. And that would be this class. Okay, so there we go. We have that same class again. We're going to say this is where x is greater than 80, but less than or equal to 100. And that is our answer. Moving on to the next question. Question 4.2 says, the box and whisker plot below shows the test results of a grade 10 class in percentages. Use the box and whisker plot above to determine 4.2.1 the lowest and highest marks obtained by the students in the test. So where do we find the lowest and the highest in a box and whisker diagram? That would be at the ends. Okay, so that 25 and that 95. That is the lowest 25, okay, percent, since they said these were in percentages. And then the highest would be 95%. Okay, so that is our answer. Moving on to the next question. Question 4.2.2 says, what percentage of the class achieved above 31%? Okay, remember that all of these are in percentages, right? They just want to know what portion of the class got more than 31%. Here's where they scored 31%, okay? It's clearly marked at Q1. That's Q2. That's Q3. So the parts of the class that got more than 31% is everybody here. Now, what percentage do they make up compared to the whole? This is how the box and whisker diagram is split up. Okay, you see how I drew this block and then I cut it into 4 parts. That's really what they do. They cut it into 4 parts and then 25% or Q1 falls here. So you know that 25% of the class would fall under here. Then if you go an extra 25%, Q2 is here. So this entire part of the class would be 50% of the class. And of course, that's also 50% of the class. And then Q3, that means 75% of the class falls here. Okay, so when looking at it like this, if this is 31, everybody who got higher than 31, they're all here. What percentage of the class is that? From the minimum to Q1, that's 25%. And then from Q1 to Q2, that's another 25%. From Q2 to Q3, another 25%. And then from Q3 to the maximum, another 25%. The portion we're looking at is this. So that's 25 plus 25 plus 25, which is a total of 75%. And there we go. 75% of the class achieved above 31% as a mark. And that is our answer. Moving on to the next question. Then they ask us, what is the median mark? The median is also called Q2. It's the middle, okay? The median mark, we can see that the person right in the middle is 64%. Okay, so the median mark was 64%. So we'll just put that down. So Q2 equals 64%. Moving on to the next question. And then what percentage of the class achieved between 64% to 80%? Okay, 64 to 80%. You see what portion this is. Remember how I split these up into 25%? There's 25% of the class falls here. The reason why it doesn't look as big as 25% is because we're speaking about their actual marks. We're just seeing the portion of the class that achieved certain marks. Okay, so that's why it's spread out, because it's spread out based on their marks. But 25% of the class, or quarter of the class, they are here, okay? They would have gotten a mark less than 31%. Okay, so that's 25%, and then 25%. This is a little 25% as well. That is another 25%, and that is 25%, making up the total 100%. So from 64 to 80 is 25% of the class. Okay, so there we go. So that is 25%. So you see how a box and whisker diagram can be used to really just analyze and understand the performance of, certain info. It just depends on the data that we have. Okay, so that is our answer there. Moving on to the next question. The last question, 4.2.5, says we need to determine the interquartile range, also known as the IQR. So remember how the range, we find the range by saying the highest minus the lowest. Well, the interquartile range is the highest quartile minus the lower quartile. Okay, so Q3 minus Q1, and we can see that Q3 is 80. Okay, that's Q3. And then Q1 is 31. So that's Q1. That's Q2. That's Q3. That's minimum and maximum. So just 80 minus 30 will give us our IQR. 80 minus, it's 31, not 30. 31. So 80 minus 30 is already 50. Then minus 1 is 49. So our IQR, remember these are still in percentages, is 41%. So I can also just say percent there. And that is our answer. And that is the last question for question 4. And that is it for question 4. Question 5 says, 2 buildings are 45 meters apart, and that is length ED. So yeah, they didn't really put that down. We need to put it down. This is 45 meters apart. And then they say separated by a park. A person on the top of the shorter building, so somebody here at point A, calculates the angle of elevation of B from A to B 30 degrees, okay? And the angle of depression of D, the base of the taller building, from A to B 50 degrees. Okay, so you can see the diagram that we have. We have triangles all over. Okay, we have a triangle here, definitely a right angle triangle, because this is the ground, this is a building, okay? It's a vertical building, so they are perpendicular. And okay, yeah, they already show you that there. And so we've got 45 here, we've got 50 degrees, we've got 30 degrees. And let's see. First question 5.1 says, determine the size of angle ADE. So angle ADE is this angle. Okay, so here's the thing about this grade 10s. They didn't ask for the reason. In Euclid, you would have to give a reason. But in this case, do you see how AC is a horizontal line? And we can also see that ED is also a horizontal line because that is the ground. That's a flat ground. Okay, so these lines are parallel. And so because of that, we have alternate angles here. So it means this angle is equal to this angle. This is 50 degrees. That is the size of angle ADE. And so that's all they asked for. ADE is simply equal to 50 degrees. In grade 11, they usually don't really tell you that, then ask you to find it. They would expect you to already know that because you have parallel lines. But in this case, they're giving you a mark for finding that. Moving on to the next question. Question 5.2 says, calculate the length of BD, the height of the taller building. Okay, so that's this entire height. And already we can see it's made up of 2 heights. So the height of CD, which is also AE, okay, seeing that this is a horizontal line and these are parallel. And we also have to find the height of BC. Okay, so let's look at the triangles that we can use here. Because in this triangle, we have an angle and we have a side. We're going to use this triangle over here. Now, our goal is to find the height. We want to find what CD is. But you can see that CD and AE are exactly the same thing. So if you find AE, you found CD. Okay, so let's find AE. We have an angle and a side. We have everything we need to find that. So you have been given a right angle triangle. And how do you find this? Because you have been given this angle, you're going to name these sides that you're going to use in relation to the angle. So the angle is over here. This side AE that we need is opposite this angle. So it's going to count as the opposite side. And then the only one that we have, the side that we actually have, ED is 45 meters. That is next to the angle, so we call that the adjacent side. So we're clearly using opposite and adjacent side. So which trig ratio will you use? Remember from SAW, Katoa. Okay, this is 2 and 3D trig. In grade 10, it's just 2D trig. Okay, and you can see that here we're going to use the ratio for tan. So let's go. So let's go ahead and find this first. We'll just say tan, and our angle is 50 degrees. So tan 50 degrees equals the opposite side over the adjacent side. So that is that opposite side of AE over that adjacent side that we already have, which is 45 meters. And how do you find AE? So to get AE alone, we need to get rid of the 45. So we can do that by multiplying both hand sides by 45. So we currently have that AE equals 45 tan 50 degrees. Okay, but also remember that AE and CD, they are equal. Okay, so these are equal lines. So I'm just going to tell them CD is also therefore equal to 4 tan 50 degrees. Now I know that 50 degrees is not a special angle, so it's going to give me decimals, and I don't want to work with decimals, so I'm going to keep it like this. Now let's focus on finding the other side. So the other side we're looking for is this BC. So in this triangle up here. Now, in this triangle, what do we know? We have an angle and we have a side. Even if you can't see it, we actually do have a side. You see how this is AE, right? 45 meters. Then this is also 45 meters because from A to C is the exact same length as E to D. That's from the first building to the second building. So this is also 45 meters. So you see that we are using the same strategy here to find it. We have an angle, we have a side, we can find this side. Okay, so name these sides relative to the angle you have. We have BC, which is clearly the opposite side, it's opposite 30 degrees. And then this side of 45 meters AC is next to it, it's the adjacent side. Okay, so we have the opposite and adjacent side, and clearly we're going to use the function again, tan. So let's just name certain things. Tell them that we know that AC equals ED. So AC is equal to ED, and then find AC. So AC, and so we know that AC is equal to 45 meters, and I'm just going to leave it like that. And now we're using tan. So this is tan 30 degrees. Tan 30 degrees equals the opposite side over the adjacent side. So that is BC over AC, which is 45. So BC over 45. And again, we need to solve for BC here. So multiply both hand sides by 45 and we would get BC. Okay, so BC equals 45 tan 30 degrees. Now I know this one would actually simplify to a number because 30 degrees is a special angle, but that is fine. What we can just do is we're trying to find the length of BD. So join your lines. So you have BD is equal to, BD is made up of CD plus BC. So we'll add them together and say this is CD plus BC. And so we already know that CD is 4 tan 50 degrees. I'll take it as it is. So then plus BC, which is 45. Did I say 4? It's 45. Okay, I apologize for that. It should be 45, not 4. Okay, so plus 45, and this is tan 30 degrees, and let's get our answer. Okay, and this is our final answer. So our final answer is 79 point, and that 9 is going to round the 0 up to a 1. So 0.61, and these are in meters. So meters, that is the length of BD. That is the height of the longest building. Okay, so that is it for that question. And that is it for question 5. Okay, so that is the last question for this paper. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to leave it in the comment section below. And I hope to see you in the future videos.